Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you Love Lies Bleeding by Edmund Crispin. This was originally published in 1948, and the version I have here was republished by Walker in 1976 as part of a reissuing of the Gervase Fen books, who is Crispin's main character. Gervase Fen, well known as an Oxford don of literature, and the hero of about, I want to say, 6 or 7 pretty well received mystery novels, including his most famous, The Moving Toyshop, which I have never read. I want to, but it just hasn't landed in my hands, and this one did, and I figured it's as good a place to start as any. So, just a little bit about Edmund Crispin. It was a pseudonym. His real name was Bruce Montgomery, and he was quite successful in his life as a novelist and a short story writer, but also as a composer. He wrote a lot of music and was quite successful in his time as a composer. And as a lover of music, I just think a person who can write and compose music, what a wonderful combination to be gifted with. His career, it seems, was sidetracked at times because he was a heavy drinker, kind of the old story. But I did read an anecdote about him that in later life, of course, he lived in England and went to London as little as possible. He sort of had this dislike of giant cities, which I wouldn't say that I share, but I will say cities are not my favorite places in general. I'm anything for a quiet life is sort of my motto, and also the title of the book by Michael Gilbert, but that's a different story. So both Crispin and his character of Gervase Fen are very well respected in terms of Golden Age mysteries and sort of intricate plots, and their very Englishness. I mean, sometimes you read a novel and it's just so English that you were there in England. And I guess England has this mystique about it because it's produced so much incredible literature and music, and the best British writers, they evoke cities and towns and neighborhoods and villages and cultural institutions so well. Like, so many books I find that are set in England are really sort of love letters to England. And there's certain things that you see a lot, such as a real love of London. The British public's knowledge of gardening and flowers and plants. I have flowers and plants, planted in my yard. I don't know what half of them are called. They look pretty and they're nice. I know I've got some daffodils. I've got some tulips, but I can't name every piece of flora that I come across. But often characters in English novels can. I guess it's just, part of their culture and who they are. Excuse me. And so, with that said, let me get started I'll give you a quick plot summary, and then I'll talk about my pros and my cons for this particular book. So, it takes place at a boys', I guess they call it public school in England, by which they really mean private school. And it's a residential school, and in the course of just several hours, 2 teachers are killed. A girl from a neighboring girls' school goes missing, and then a little bit further down the road, this stray woman who appears to have nothing to do with the plot on the face of it is also killed. So lots of murder going on in this book, but murder very very unbloody, very sort of, off the page. The title, Love Lies Bleeding, is a pun because one of the characters who is murdered is Mr. Love, a teacher, and he's found bleeding, hence the literary title, which sometimes punning titles can be a little cutesy, but I did like this one. So as fate would have it, there are some school goings on, and the headmaster, Dr. Stanford, has invited his friend from Oxford, Gervase Fen, who by this point is also known as a detective, to give a speech. And so Gervase is just in the right place at the right time to solve these murders. And the book is pretty golden age in terms of throwing out lots of clues and having the detective really sort of understand what they mean almost instantly, and kind of look askance slightly at other people who don't understand exactly what those clues point to, including the reader. So Gervase sort of nods sagely a lot while thinking, I know what's going on here, but certainly the local constabulary does not, and neither does anybody else, except for the perp. So things I like about this book. The first is I tend to like books that are set in a microcosm. And, I'm an American. I went to public school. So the whole, British private school system is kind of fascinating to me, to see how, kind of how regimented it was, how busy they kept those kids. I've read books that sort of talk about the darker side of these schools where the discipline can be brutal. This one is sort of a humorous look at the school and the teachers and the many traditions. It's English, so everything is based on tradition. And I just thought that Crispin developed that world really well. I sort of felt like I was there. I can't imagine having wanted that when I was that age, to go away to residential school. But, I'm an American, and it wasn't really an option, for a middle-class kid. But, it's so much a part of English culture to get thrown onto that campus and to see what goes on, and the rivalries, and, the comedic professors who, are sort of laughingstocks, and, people who are around and their eccentricities. It's all sort of, in good fun. Josephine Tay did this for a girls' school in her novel Miss Pym Disposes. I like that book a lot. Margaret Miller in How Like an Angel goes into sort of almost like a religious cult. It's not really called a cult, but it's definitely sort of a fringe religion, and she really gets deep into that. And so, in terms of world building or world creation, I think Crispin did a really nice job, probably because that was the world that he really knew extremely well. There were several references to things I just had no idea what they meant. And I was like, yeah, I probably should look this up, but I didn't. If you're an English major, as I was, the book will tickle you because there's so many references to literature, and Crispin is unabashedly unafraid to use his vocabulary. So I had to keep a list of vocabulary words that I had to look up because I was curious. And I think my vocabulary is pretty decent, but there were words where I was like, what? I had to figure it out from context or just blip by it. So to me, that's sort of it's a pro for me because I like that, I like an author who really wants to massage the language and have his own style and put his mark on his book. But on the other side of that, I could see some people thinking it a little bit too much, a little too discursive, just a little too talky, because that's a lot of what goes on in this book is talk between the various crimes. Excuse me again. So I also really thought that Crispin's descriptions were wonderful in terms of, the English countryside and people, and he just really was very, very skilled at that. So you could tell a great observer. And the plot is puzzling. You can't quite figure out what's going on. There's I'll give you a little hint. It's not a spoiler. Part of it revolves around a lost Shakespeare play called Love's Labours 1, which apparently there's a lot of controversy about. At first I thought this was just made up for the book, but I looked it up and it turns out that scholars do think that there is this missing Shakespeare play that may have morphed into Much Ado About Nothing. There's all that cool sort of literary scholarship that is fun if you like that kind of stuff. The ending is, because it's a Golden Age book, it's the reveal has to happen over 2 lengthy chapters because it's very, very intricate. And it uses a technique, not a writing technique. It uses let's say a plot device that I don't think I've ever seen used before. And I thought, oh, that was kind of clever. Would not have seen that coming. And now it's in my arsenal of things that murderers can use in books. So I'll know it when I see it again, if I ever do. So I like the fact that Gervase Fen gets to talk about his thought process and his observations and how he put 2 and 2 together and how he figured everything out. There's always the question of when the protagonist keeps his information to himself. Is he putting other people in danger by not revealing what he knows? And there's a little bit of that going on here, but you can deal with it as just sort of a convention of fiction and and live with it. So those are the things that I liked about the book. The cons are, I guess, like I said, the sort of wordiness, the polysyllabic vocabulary words that many of us have to look up. The character of Gervase Fen I found strangely flat, in that we know that he's married, we know that he has kids, we know that he's an Oxford Don, but you don't really get much of a sense of his personality. He doesn't really seem to have many quirks, or he's likable. People like him, and he's down to earth, and he's got some human warmth to him. He's not a cold automaton. But I just found that he was a little bit under-sketched in this book, and that's okay, because I've seen that done in other books, and it doesn't bother me so much. But I just felt like, in my mind, I know that Gervase Fen is really considered a classic character, and I wanted to, bond with him a little bit more. I feel like, oh, this is a dude I really want to spend more time with. And I will read the Moving Toyshop at some point, but he just wasn't, I thought, sketched out quite as much as I would have liked. The character that I liked the most was the headmaster, who's got sort of this subtly ironic and dry sense of humor. He's been at the school for however many centuries, and nothing phases him, and he's just like, he trudges to work every morning and trudges home every night. It's just like the weight of the world is on his shoulders, but he's a great manager because he's surprised by nothing. So I would say, if you like a traditional English novel, if you like sort of a literary plot, a literary mystery, You feel like lots of allusions to great plays and poetry. And if you really like to pit your wits against an author, I think this is a good book to do it with. I can't imagine how any reader could have figured out who done it in this book. It's because it's complicated. For a 200-page book, it feels quite complicated. But, that's fine. Complicated books can be good. I love a longer, complicated book that can really ensnare me. So this one I thought was good, and I would read more by Crispin. I wouldn't say I loved it, but I enjoyed it enough to read more by him and to see why he has the reputation that he has, Edmund Crispin, aka Bruce Montgomery. So that's what I've got for you tonight. I'll be back next time, and in the meantime, I hope everybody has a pleasant tomorrow.